Thanks and welcome to this session this afternoon, looking at the future of omni and multi-channel retail. As those of us who are here heard from the Secretary of State, Vince Cable, this morning, UK consumers spend more online per head than any other country in the world, and UK retailers are at the vanguard of multi-channel shopping. So we've invited some of the best and the brightest digital shopkeepers to speak to you today to see what their strategies for success are and how we can deliver online for the global consumer. We've not one, but two sessions that flow into each other this afternoon. The first is going to look at the interface between the retailer and the customer, and the second is more focused on the infrastructure and the, if you like, the back of shop issues for retailers. So much to pack in this afternoon. Let me go straight to our first speaker. Tony Stockil down here is the founder and CEO of Javelin Group, Europe's largest specialist consultancy in e-commerce and multi-channel retail. Javelin Group help some of the world's largest retailers to execute their multi-channel strategies, and their client list includes almost all of the UK's top 20 retailers, with many more overseas. He's going to talk about how e-commerce is transforming retail and the opportunities and challenges that this presents to retailers today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tony Stockil.
Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Michael. So in a short sort of 15-minute session, I'm going to give you our sort of perspective on what is happening in the market. So as Michael has said, I run Javelin Group, a team of about 160 people specializing in e-commerce and multi-channel, working for major retailers, brands, and B2B distributors, and helping them to properly execute omni-channel strategies, if you like. And you can see some of the clients that we work with over there, some of the things that we do, and essentially our credentials. But it's basically drawing on that I'm going to give you a sort of tour d'horizon of what's going on in the world, and in particular in the UK, in terms of the changes that are taking place in retail, because it truly is a fairly dramatic change that we're seeing in the nature of the relationship between the consumer and the retailer, and how retailers need to engage effectively. And that is transforming retail economics and retail processes and the core skills and capabilities that retailers need. So quickly, let's take a look at what's going on in the UK in terms of e-commerce sales. So right now, we've got roughly 28 billion pounds worth of sales online, and that's been a pretty rapid growth since 2006, over the last 5 years. And we are seeing pretty much the same quantum of growth being forecast by the analysts over the next 5 years as well. So there is no sense in which this is topping out. The growth rate is continuing, and actually, for most retailers, I would say, I think it's fair to say most retailers, this is the major source of growth, and in some cases, the sole source of growth. And in truth, there is no self-respecting major retailer today, bar one or two, who do not have a multi-channel strategy right at the heart of their businesses. Now, it's clear to see that if you look at the UK here, as Michael said, the UK is the most highly penetrated market in the world in terms of e-commerce. We have roughly 8 or 9% of retail sales captured online. And I define retail sales here by excluding tickets and travel and other such things. So this is goods we're talking about here. And that compares favorably with all of the other major retail markets in the world. We're further ahead than the US. We're further ahead, of course, than continental Europe. And what you can do, in fact, is if you look across the world, you can divide the market broadly into three chunks. You've got the more mature markets, which are basically North America and Northwest Europe. You've then got the sort of Central and Southern European tier, which are roughly 1 to 4% penetration of e-commerce. And then finally, you've got the BRICS, Turkey, and others, all the way down to those who really don't have an e-commerce industry at all. But up here in the sort of top quadrant, or the top segment, we have rapid growth, significant scale, and this is where the economics of retail are really being transformed. And in fact, if you compare the Anglo-Saxon markets, the UK and the US here, you can see roughly 30 billion, we're in euros now, so roughly 30 billion euros worth of sales online. Store-based retailers dominate about 3/4 of that market. In the US, it's about 60%, with a fairly substantial chunk being dedicated to e-commerce, and you can see them in the light red there. Amazon by itself accounts for a very significant chunk of that e-commerce share of market. By contrast, if you look at continental Europe, what you can see is a much less mature market, where store-based retailers there in the top right account for some sort of 20 to 30% of retail of e-commerce, rather than the 60 to 75% that we're used to in the Anglo-Saxon markets. This is changing. Store-based retailers in continental Europe are now waking up quite significantly to the opportunity and are embracing and investing in e-commerce to a very significant degree. And of course, you can see that in the UK, those retailers who have embraced, and of course it's most of them now, are counting their e-commerce revenues in billions. A fair number of these are grocery retailers. So grocery e-commerce has taken off in the UK in a way that, at a national scale, in a way that it really hasn't anywhere else in the world. So we have world-class, I think it's fair to say, grocery e-commerce. Partly that's to do with, clearly, the density of population that we have in England that enables the economic delivery of home shopping, of grocery goods to the front door in a way that wouldn't be possible in markets like Australia or the USA, where the cost of delivery would be so much greater. But what's clear is that these retailers and the others in general merchandise have understood that actually e-commerce is not just about selling online. The e-commerce fulfills two functions, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the other key thing to notice is just relative to these, is just how big Amazon is compared with these others. So Amazon is the gorilla in the room. It's the monster that is continuing to grow extremely fast, and by itself actually is transforming retail economics in key categories. We'll come back to that in a second. So these retailers, these store-based retailers, have discovered fairly early on, in fact, that e-commerce is not just used for transaction, to buy stuff. It is also used by consumers to inform themselves before they then go into stores, or regardless of how they may want to shop. And in fact, you can plot different product categories on this 2x2 chart, and you can see how the web behaves in each case. So in something like food and grocery, consumers are not going online to find out the price of yogurt. They're not going online to discover the health benefits of their favorite cereal. On the whole, what they are doing more is filling baskets and transacting for home delivery. That's essentially how they're using the web in the most case. Likewise, with music and video, when you're going online to Amazon, you are going to check out with Amazon more likely than not. You are not going to compare one book with another book across different retailers or informing yourself before you go into a store. By contrast, in a sector like DIY and gardening or health and beauty, a lot of the time consumers are researching online as a precursor to coming into the store. And so the web is actually driving a lot of traffic to stores. And in many cases, the web is the first port of call for consumers at the beginning of their customer journey. And then, of course, you've got a bunch of categories, clothing, electricals, homewares, and in some cases furniture as well, where the web fulfills both functions. Consumers could be online to research before coming into a store, or they could be online in order to transact, of course, as with people like Amazon or Dixon's or other retailers as well. So you can see how the web performs or fulfills a multitude of functions, and how important it is, therefore, in the customer journey. And it's that realization that came to UK retailers back in around, or to many UK retailers, back in 1998, 99, 2000. In fact, before the dot-com bubble burst originally, that led to a sort of cohort of major retailers coming into the market. And it meant that actually the UK e-commerce market was well supplied very early on. And that meant, of course, that consumers got educated to buying online from their favorite retailers very quickly. And that's partly why I think that explains to some degree why the UK is now the best penetrated market in the world. If you look at how the customer journey has evolved in a category like electricals, you can see the extent to which it has changed. If you compare back in the year 2000, when the roughly £20 billion worth of consumer electricals were sold mainly in store, without reference to the web. So the retailer might advertise on TV, but essentially the customer would be informing themselves about the product once they were in the store. By 2005, you can see there in the lilac part of the bar that actually customers were largely researching online before then coming into the store. In other words, this was research online, buy in store. By 2010, you can see that actually 30% of the market was being transacted online in some form or another. In some cases being collected in the store, but actually being purchased online in the first instance. And then finally, if you go out to 2020, you can see that by then, more than half of consumer electronics will be transacted online, and actually that the store will have a diminishing role in the customer journey. That's not to say that it will be irrelevant by any means, but certainly if one were, and there aren't any such retailers, but if one were a store-only retailer in this market, today such a business would be out of business in effect. So it is essential in this category and in others to be a multi-channel retailer. The same is true for clothing and footwear. As you can see, I don't think I need to labor this too much. By 2020, we expect the market to be divided roughly into 3/3. 1/3 will be traditional window shopping, if you like, in the store, researching in the store and buying in the store. 1/3 will be researching from home before then shopping in the store, ROPO. And then 1/3 will be purchased online, and in some cases collected in the store. And you can see the same story in other categories as well, in health and beauty, and grocery, and others. And this transformation in the customer experience, in the customer journey, is really at the heart of the new retailing that is evolving in order to meet this demand. And one of the sets of retailers that has benefited the most from this and has really embraced this the most is department stores. And what you can see here on this chart is department stores plotted, in fact, this Anglo-Saxon department stores, we've got continental European department stores down here in the corner, plotted on this chart. You can see their total revenues along the bottom of the chart. This is across all channels. And then along the side, you can see e-commerce as a percentage of their revenues. And what you see is that back in 2011, and these numbers have obviously moved on since then, John Lewis, Saks, Neiman Marcus, Debenhams, Marks & Spencer, Nordstrom, and JCPenney were all above 8%. Generating a very significant share of their sales online, but of course also driving an even more significant share of traffic to their stores. And if you look back to where they were 3 years before that, you can see the rate of growth for these businesses. You can see that in many cases they've utterly transformed themselves. And this is, as I say, this is where their growth is coming from. This is the engine of growth, without a doubt, for businesses like Saks and John Lewis. John Lewis, I think, has just announced, if I didn't misread the numbers, 40-odd% growth in their online revenues over the last 12 months. I mean, just an astonishing rate of growth for a business that is already taking a very large share of their sales online. So there's a tailwind here. There's lots of opportunity to go for. That's the good news. The bad news, of course, is that Amazon is growing very, very strongly indeed. And look at this curve. There seems no sign of Amazon slowing down. In fact, really, it looks like they're just taking off. And I heard a forecast the other day, was it Andy Bond at Walmart, Walmart UK, Asda, predicting that by 2020, Amazon would be bigger than Walmart in absolute sales. And already the market capitalization of Amazon is such that it exceeds a pretty large chunk of US retailing combined, in fact. So the forecast, the pundits' forecast for how big this is going to be is quite extraordinary. And that, of course, is undermining gross margins. It's taking market share. It's doing all sorts of things to the legacy store-based retailers that they're finding extremely uncomfortable. And they're not alone, of course. There are many other such retailers out there, pureplay.coms, that are equally taking share and undermining margins in a very significant way. And increasingly, in some cases like Kiddicare, for example, becoming the first reference point for consumers. So rather than our traditional store-based retailers, people like Mothercare being the first port of call, actually, for some consumers, it's changing now. You know, for how many of us is Amazon the first port of call when we're thinking of what to buy? And clearly, some retailers are suffering very badly indeed as a result of this. These two were, 3-4 years ago, poster children for the multi-channel revolution. These were considered to be innovators and at the forefront of multi-channel. And actually, what they found is, in some cases, that they needed to continue innovating and really transform their business models more thoroughly than they have in order to keep up with the consumer change. And all of this, of course, has been driving quite significant store vacancies. So with this shift in consumer behavior and the declining relative role of the store for the consumer, actually what we're seeing is more and more stores lying empty and fewer venues as a result. Our forecast is that by 2020 we will have 31% fewer stores on UK high streets than we have today, and that's a very significant transformation. And part of that is being driven by, obviously, the decline of certain venues. As retailers leave, venues are becoming less and less compelling places to shop. And at the same time, we're sort of seeing a polarization into the more strongly performing venues. Here's Westfield, which is, you know, an example of real excellence and drawing customers in. But of course, those customers are being drawn from somewhere, which is the less performing high streets in many cases. So looking ahead, we are going to see fewer, bigger, better venues. And likewise, we expect to see fewer, bigger, better stores as well among our retailers' estates. So what can we do about this? Well, really a sort of small handful of things that retailers really, really need to focus on. And first is obviously delivering a compelling proposition. And for many, right at the heart of that is the creation of a brand that customers will remember, a reason to shop with this retailer and nowhere else. And that's why, of course, own label, own brand has become such an important battleground for retailers. Just at the same time, of course, brands are themselves becoming retailers. In many cases, they're taking ownership of the customer and establishing their own retail presence, both online and in stores. And so the old horizontally stratified value chain is being transformed, it's being turned on its side. Now actually retailers are becoming brands, brands are becoming retailers, and that's an important part of the transformation. A second and absolutely essential piece, obviously, is building the capabilities to deliver to the customer across a multitude of channels, part of which is building a strong e-commerce capability. And for that requires a whole array of different skills that retailers often, store-based retailers often do not have or have not inherited from their legacy. And so it requires, for example, in the online customer experience, the creation of a really powerful product information factory, so you can feed the right kind of information to your website to enable customers who are researching to really understand the product and make sure that it's properly up to date and all this kind of thing. And the sort of industrialization of this process is something that most retailers still are very far from having got to grips with. But there are many other areas where retailers are struggling really to catch up with the skills and capabilities that are exemplified by businesses like ASOS and Net-a-Porter and Amazon. These sort of fast-moving, nimble changes of assortment and bringing in something new all the time onto the website. These are things that store-based retailers, which have been typically more seasonally oriented, have not been good at in the past. At the same time, of course, retailers are changing their store formats quite significantly to cater for this changing customer behavior. So some of you may well be aware of the House of Fraser micro store that they've now got in Liverpool 1 and up in Aberdeen, the Aberdeen shopping centre, which is basically a 1,000 square foot store. Compared with the 100,000 square foot department store that they typically have. And this is to enable customers to order online and collect in store. It's basically just a counter with a few terminals to order from if they choose to. And I understand actually that these are performing very well. They're far more than paying their way, actually outperforming some of the large department stores that House of Fraser has, which is extraordinary in a 1,000 square foot box. Equally, retailers are looking at ways to bring e-commerce into the store to really facilitate this cross-channel journey. So Aurora has been piloting and rolling out iPads in their store, and they're by no means the only one, to enable customers to access an extended range or to enable a product that might be out of stock to be fulfilled and delivered to the customer. Oops, I'm sorry, let me just... Too late. Thank you.
So this is our M&S Style Online interactive screen. You can have a look. These are our trends for this season. So here we have retro glam, historical romance, and 60s pop. And that's the blouse that you picked out.
Oh, yes.
And we can view the other look.
Oh, I really like that.
Yeah, that is a lovely piece. Colour blocking is very big this season. And we can also watch a video. And there you go, we can see.
I wanted to tell you to introduce that slide was this is an example of the kind of innovation that we are seeing now. This is Marks & Spencer, obviously, their Style Online, very large in-store touch screen that enables customers to select merchandise. This is a great example of retailers innovating to bring e-commerce into the store to ensure the endless aisle that people have been talking about. And in fact, I think, is Benji here from M&S? Is there anybody here from M&S? Yes, you've got here an illustration, haven't you? Some demonstrations of. of the makeover down in the terrace. If you want to see it, there are examples of this, which I thoroughly recommend you go and have a look at, because I think it's a little glimpse of retailing in the future and how other retailers are going to be. And of course, the mobile device is also transforming things quite significantly as well. And in fact, in all truth, nobody quite knows how yet the mobile device is going to transform things, but it is certainly going to be the way people pay. It's going to be the way they're recognized as they cross the threshold into the store. It's going to fill a multitude of gaps that we currently have in the management of the customer relationship. And in fact, there's another little video clip I'm going to show you right now, which sort of illustrates that to some extent. This is the combination of the mobile phone, the in-store device, the changed in-store experience. This is, again, a kind of illustration of where we're really going with e-commerce. And it's new stores, a new shopping experience entirely. Also, of course, we're going to see a dramatic change in the store estate. Mainly, we expect retailers are going to have fewer stores, on the whole, larger stores, better stores, but of course in different locations. So retailers are right now in the process of completely replanning their estate. And if we look at, in fact, I'm going to skip this next slide just in the interest of time, and move on to this one. Of course, what retailers are now doing is using their e-commerce capability to springboard into new markets. And this is a big change that's really started to happen in the last 18 months. We expect, in fact, we are seeing UK retailers do this, we're seeing US retailers do this. In other words, the ones that are at the more mature end of the e-commerce curve are using this to springboard into international markets. So those markets should expect much more competition as a result from the likes of M&S.com and others like them coming in with an online presentation of their offer. So all that said, basically, there's a lot of change going on, and I'll leave you with the words of Charles Darwin, who said, "It's not the strongest of the species nor the most intelligent that survives. It is, of course, the one that is most adaptable to change." Thank you very much.